A lot of the uncertainty regarding the Final Fantasy VII Remake has finally been clarified. Now, we have a release date, however, some of that uncertainty still remains. The game is gonna be multiple parts, but here's this. Even though the first part is releasing early next year, we don't know exactly how many parts the game is gonna be. Square Enix themselves doesn't know, but I do want to get you guys up to speed with all of the Final Fantasy VII news and give you guys my input as well and where I see this going. On top of that, we do have some information on Project Awakening. This is a game a lot of you guys may have forgotten about, but it's the latest game coming from Games, and it's an action RPG that technically it looks incredible. It was revealed as a part of the Tokyo Game Show PlayStation lineup last year, and since then we hadn't heard much about it, but the guys over at Fextra Life did get an in-depth interview with Games, and I do want to go over some of the things said in that. More on that at the end of this video, but speaking to Kotaku's Jason Schreier, the Final Fantasy VII Remake director, and Yoshinori Kitase cannot say how many games the remake project will consist of, and here's why he couldn't say, quote, because we don't know ourselves. Yes, Square Enix has plans to make the Final Fantasy VII Remake a multiple game project, however, they themselves at this point don't know, which is kind of crazy. Kitase added that the development team is currently in the process of planning out the scope of the second game, while simultaneously finishing up the development for the first game. Now, the first game is going to be absolutely massive. The majority of games these days will be fine on just one disc, but part 1 of the Final Fantasy VII Remake actually spans 2 Blu-ray discs, and it's set to cover all of Midgar. Now, that's actually a sizable amount of content. However, given the fact that they themselves don't know how many parts the Final Fantasy VII Remake project is going to be, I think any indication that it is going to be just 2 parts can be thrown out the window, because if it was 2 parts, you could just say, okay, it's going to be 2 parts. Part 1 is going to be Midgar, part 2 is going to be the rest of the game, case closed, we're done with that. But if you don't even know how many parts the game is going to be, but you have the idea already in place that, oh, the game is going to be multiple parts, well, then that notion of it being 2 parts, I think you can completely throw it away. He also mentioned, which was clarified later, that he didn't expect the remake parts to get accelerated after the release of the first part, but that was clarified. First, Kitase said, while characters and such are done, which will make some things easier, new environments will likely still take some time, and he said, quote, I do not expect it to be dramatically shorter. Square Enix Public Relations sent Game Informer a follow-up email following that statement from Kitase. The email said, quote, while the development team finishes the first game of the project, they are also planning the volume of content for the second. Due to the work already done on the first game, we anticipate that the development of the second game will be much more efficient. However, we would like to focus on the development of the first game. The verbiage and wording they use, I'm trying to dissect exactly what to expect here, but I think at the very least that this is going to be a 3-part game. Now, I've been wrong about the Final Fantasy VII Remake so many times, it seems like Square Enix keeps going back and forth, but just based on the verbiage that they're putting out, I'm trying to dissect what we're going to expect. Now, some of you guys might be thinking, okay, if the Final Fantasy VII Remake is 3 parts, and each part is 2 discs, does that mean the entirety of the remake is going to span 6 discs? That would be absolutely crazy. I don't think that's necessarily going to be the case, because yes, while part 1 of the FF7 Remake is going to be on the PS4, I do believe part 2 and however many parts are going to follow part 1, they are going to be on the PlayStation 5, so be mindful of that as well, and by that point, maybe the Blu-ray disc will be larger, whatever the case may be, and you can fit the entirety of the game onto 1 disc. We know that Red Dead Redemption 2 was on 2 discs as well, but that was the entirety of the game. Final Fantasy VII Remake here, this is just part of the overarching narrative, which is kind of crazy, and thinking how much they're trying to pack into the FF7 Remake. Now, they are trying to remake the entirety of a massive game, so I can kind of understand from that standpoint. However, you also have to question, even if they are remaking that entire game, there are elements like the overworld that you would think they don't have to remake the entirety of that just because the game is going to be presented in a different style. So if this is the case, is this going to be a case where they're adding in a bunch of other content? I do think that they're going to enhance the overall experience, or maybe using the word enhance is a little bit misguided, because let's say changes, maybe some of those changes will be received positively, maybe some of them will be received negatively, who knows on that. But I do imagine that yes, while the overarching narrative is going to stay largely similar, I do imagine that they're going to make some gameplay refinements, maybe even some content refinements at that. We know the gameplay is obviously much different, but now we're talking strictly from a content standpoint. I don't want to talk about spoilers or anything like that, but you guys know of some of the characters. If you've played Final Fantasy VII, how are they going to implement characters like Vincent into the game? There are just so many questions surrounding the remake that it honestly makes my head spin, but nonetheless, at least now we finally know that the game will be dropping March 3rd. and it will be part 1 of a multiple part series. The question remains, why are they titling it just Final Fantasy VII Remake? To the naked eye, that might be a little bit misleading. Not everybody is going to be following the Final Fantasy VII Remake news to a T, so it has to be specified on the box or somewhere that it is a multiple part series, because somebody that hasn't played games in many years, maybe they just have a PlayStation 4 in the house, and then they go into the store, and then they see, oh, Final Fantasy VII was remade, that's so cool, or maybe they see a commercial for it, and then they go buy the game, and then they realize, oh wait, this isn't the entire game, because this is a game that was an absolute game changer back in 1997, and it's such an iconic game, and it's a game that so many people that have phased out of gaming still fondly remember, so it's gonna draw in that nostalgic audience, but you have to make sure that that audience knows that this is a multiple part project, and what they're buying is only part of the entirety of the experience, and not maybe exactly what they remembered out of the original game. There's so much to talk about when it comes to the FF7 remake. It honestly makes my head spin, as I just mentioned, but nonetheless, at least we know we can get started in playing the Final Fantasy VII remake exclusively on the PlayStation 4 on March 3rd. Alright, moving on from that, Fextra Life also has a very interesting interview with Psy Games talking Project Awakening. Now again, Project Awakening was shown off at the Tokyo Game Show last year, and an international trailer was released featuring a new world of beasts and a knight-like hero who looked to be taking on a monster one-on-one. Speaking of Psy Games, they asked what is Project Awakening, and they noted it's really hard to pinpoint as we're not sure how much information we can share about this, but to make it simple, we are Psy Games, a Japanese game company. This will be our pilot game to penetrate the Western market with a console game. What genre would you consider it? It'll be an open world game. It'll have a multiplayer function to get together with your friends and battle. It'll have lots of fighting, blood, and sweat. We're trying something really new and interesting, that's as much as we can say. Is it more action or more role-playing? It's still a bit in discussion on our end. While it will feature RPG elements, I really want to focus on the action elements more so. You mentioned multiplayer. Is it co-op or PvP? In general, it's co-op to get together with your friends and fight it out together. Is the game going to be heavily story-driven, following a strong narrative, or is it going to have a loose story focus but more of a focus on gameplay? Noting on what were inspirations for the game, they mentioned primarily that would be orthodox high fantasy via the Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones. What platforms will it be available on? Is it next generation? As new as possible and as broad as possible. That's not really our goal, but if it happens a new generation comes out and our game is still in development, then yes, it will be on new generation consoles. Could you tell us a bit about the gameplay and the general concept? They noted, so there is a trailer published, which I think you have seen. It features a big boss battle that is one of the concepts, really getting to interact with creatures. Everything should feel vivid, real, and just raw. Judging on the overall scope of the trailer, that is out basically features about 1% of what we envisioned the game to be like in the end. In terms of scale, what do you envision in terms of size? How would you compare it, for example, to the size of Skyrim? Where does it fall in comparison? I guess in total it would be close to those type of games, but when we speak of scope, it does not mean to just a huge map for us to explore, but things that you can do in certain areas of the game should have certain layers. You mentioned co-op. What distinguishes players apart from each other? Do they have different roles to play, classes, or the equipment you use that separates you? What makes each player different? Psy Games noted, well, that is pretty much undecided, but we will have different classes, lots of different outfits, gear, and items, etc. It will not be that people will get together in guilds and always stick together in the same formations, but maybe it will depend on the bosses that they are currently facing. They might need certain people with skills or classes and get together with those people. After it's done, they might split up and get together with a new group of people. Okay, so that's just some of the insight that Fextra Life was able to bring with Psy Games. Now, based on all of the questions that were asked and the responses, you can see that this game is still incredibly early on in development. We don't even know if it's going to be a current gen title or a next generation game. And it seems like a lot of the fundamental gameplay aspects, either they haven't been decided on or they're just not ready to share them. And given that, I imagine that this game is still a long ways away, given that it was just announced at the Tokyo Game Show. Games announced at the Tokyo Game Show sometimes take a long time to actually come to fruition. These big budget Japanese titles just stay in development for a long time a lot of the times. And I imagine that that's what we're gonna have with Project Awakening, but it is Psy Games' first attempt to really break into the Western market, and based on what we've seen thus far, the game looks incredibly compelling, the visuals look outstanding, and it'll be interesting to see how the game turns out. I just wouldn't imagine that you're going to be able to play this game anytime in the near future. I don't think it's going to be a 2020 release. I think 2021 is more likely, and even then it might be a 2022 game. Yes, I expect this game to be in development for a very long time. Just based on this interview and based on how little information we're really getting about it, I imagine that Project Awakening is going to be in development for a very long time, much like the Final Fantasy VII Remake is. So talking about these two games really go hand in hand given their development cycles, but development cycles of a different regard given that Final Fantasy VII is a remake and a game that's narrative is already in place. while Project Awakening is a brand new IP. But that's gonna conclude this video. I really wanted to get my thoughts on the Final Fantasy VII Remake out there. So crazy that at this point, part 1 is what, 9 months away, and we don't even know how many parts of the game is really gonna be. This is a story that's already in place. I feel like at this point we should know how many parts of the game is gonna be. We just know that Square Enix is currently planning out the scope for the second game. Hopefully, after the release of the first part, they could do something similar to like what Final Fantasy XIII did, and they released games every other year. While Katase noted that game development time isn't going to be accelerated all too much, I don't want to be waiting another 5 or 6 years until the release of another part of the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Are you going to tell me that one part is going to be on PS4, then one part's going to be on PS5, and then the final part is going to be on PS6? Come on now. That is just not something I want to deal with. Let's get the first part out in 2020, second part in 2022, and then maybe the third part to round things out in 2024. Can't believe I'm already talking about 2024 game releases, but that's just what we gotta do when we're talking about Final Fantasy. Project Awakening is another game that's probably a ways away, but based on what we're seeing thus far, it does look to be a rather compelling project. That's gonna conclude this video. Sound off with all of your thoughts in the comments section down below. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. Hey guys, we hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and if you're already subscribed, do us a favor and hit the bell icon. This way you'll be notified whenever we post a new video. That's the best way to keep up with all of our uploads, and we usually try to upload 2 videos a day. And with the bell icon hit, you'll be notified whenever we do upload a video. As always, thanks for watching.